South Koreans are always intrigued by North Korea. Because all communication and contact is banned by both sides, this is the next best thing to getting a glimpse of the other side. It's been like this since the end of the three-year Korean War in 1953. While there were hopes for reunification in the past, many analysts don't see that happening in the near future. Especially since North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un in January said creating a single sovereign Korean state was no longer possible. One expert says this statement means North Korea no longer believes that pathway can be peaceful and that the only way reunification can happen is through military means.
North Korea has deemed South Korea now the principal enemy, the primary enemy of the state. I think with every year that goes by that we don't have unification, that the prospects do become less and less over time. We're talking, more than 70 years already of separation with very little contact with each other, with their societies. And so they've, developed in very different ways, culturally, politically, economically, and that gap continues to grow.
She says recent threats by North Korea should be taken seriously because they could escalate into a possible conflict, even though both South and North Korea don't want a war, particularly as South Korea and the U.S. deepen their extended deterrence.
We see a lot of mirror language about, like, if you're doing drills, we're doing drills too, because we also have to be ready. You say you have to be ready, we also have to be ready. I think there definitely is a reason for concern about how this escalates, because we are kind of stuck on this spiral of drill for drill for drill for drill. But at the same time, I don't think either side wants a war. So it's something that we can't take lightly, we can't take our eyes off of. We have to acknowledge these changes in policy and changes in approach and recalibrate accordingly, but in a way that's also very cautious not to push ourselves into a situation we don't want.
Even if a full-scale war can be avoided, analysts say there's always a possibility that North Korea's provocations could include bombings of islands near the disputed Western Sea border. Like in 2010, when North Korea launched an artillery and rocket barrage on Yeonpyeong Island, 80 kilometers west of the South Korean port city of Incheon. 2 South Korean civilians and 2 Marines were killed. This expert believes real peace is unlikely to happen on the Korean peninsula under the current situation.
큰 전쟁의 위험은 사라졌지만 국민의 입장에서 봤을 때, 우리 한반도에 살고 있는 우리 입장에서 봤을 때 늘상 군사적인 위협, 충돌 위협 속에 살아야 되고 전쟁까지 가지 않는지만 이거를 평화라고 할 수 있을까요? 대단히 어쩌면 불편한 가짜 평화 속에 우리가 살아야 될지도 모르는 거죠, 사실요.
And while he says something must be done to change that fake peace into real peace, he does not predict North Korea will team up with its 2 closest allies, Russia and China, the way South Korea has with the US and Japan to beef up security cooperation.
지금 북러 관계에 같이 동조를 한다? 이러면 말이 안 맞고 사실 실제적으로 중국의 위상이 떨어지는 거죠. 그러니까 중국은 북러 간에 하는 것은 개별 이 양자 간의 문제다 하고 찬성도 아니고 그냥 두는 거예요. 오히려 뒷짐지고 좋아할 수는 있겠죠. 그러나 개입은 하지 않습니다. 그렇기 때문에 북중러라는 어떤 그 삼각관계가 이루어질 가능성은 없다고 보고 이러한 점은 대단히 중요해요.
Although Jenny Town of 38 North agrees trilateral cooperation is unlikely, she is concerned about deepening ties between Moscow and Pyongyang.
I think Russia's been signaling that they really see a role for North Korea in not only the war fighting in Ukraine in terms of providing arms, but as a partner in the larger war against the West. And so if there is sort of this strategic cooperation that's going on, there is value in having a very provocative North Korea. It does create more challenges in trying to establish any kind of diplomatic track with the North Koreans, even on things like risk reduction.
And surveys suggest the South Koreans, especially the younger generation, favor less risk over reunification. That's because South Koreans believe the two Koreas have been divided for too long and it's impossible to live together. For many of them, reunification no longer means living under one Korea and one government, but rather living in harmony with no possibility of a conflict breaking out on the Korean peninsula. And for Professor Kim, that means being able to eventually move freely between the now heavily guarded border separating the two Koreas.
10년, 20년 후에 그렇게 그냥 두면 가겠지만 우리는 그렇게 만들어서는 절대 안 된다는 거죠. 체제 통합이나 어떤 법률적으로 물리적으로 통합하는 게 아니라 저는 사람의 통합이 필요하다고 봐요. 남쪽에 있는 사람이 오늘 아침에 평양 가서 밥을 먹고 서울로 돌아올 수 있으면 되는 거고요. 우리의 많은 사람들이 북한의 평양 땅에 가 있고 북의 많은 사람들이 우리 한국 땅에 와 있어요. 쉽게 그렇게 총을 쏠 수 있을까요?
To be able to travel freely between the two Koreas and allow communication between the people from both sides of the border are very likely what South Koreans want, as there is definitely less desire for unification, especially among the younger generation.
It was March 2013, days before he was elected to his first term as president. Chinese leader Xi Jinping told a group of military leaders in Beijing that China has a dream. A dream to transform the People's Liberation Army into a world-class military, along with bringing Taiwan back to the motherland. Military modernization formed the key pillars of the Chinese leader's so-called national rejuvenation goal to be achieved by 2049.
At its recently concluded annual political meetings, China announced that it would be maintaining the increase in its defense spending at 7.2% for this year. Now, this comes not only amid tensions in the Taiwan Strait, but other potential flashpoints in its backyard, including in the South China Sea and on the Korean Peninsula.
But as China's military budget consistently rose for the last 3 decades, so has wariness over its growing military might. China has said it will never renounce the right to use force to take back Taiwan. Analysts said strengthening its army is China's legitimate right, but with Taiwan in the equation, it has inevitably aroused suspicion.
It reflects a more generically Chinese intention to become strong. They're still far from the United States, but to ensure that within the region it is able to safeguard its borders. So I wouldn't overly read as a clear intention of trying to take Taiwan. But that said, any conflict over the Taiwan Straits is inevitably going to draw in countries around the region, Philippines, Japan, maybe even Vietnam, and that's not good. The Chinese view this as a domestic issue, but I'm pretty sure the rest of the countries outside of China view it as an issue with regional, if not international, implications.
The world needs no reminder how testy the situation could be. Tensions flared recently after a deadly incident in Taiwan-controlled waters near the Kinmen Island. 2 Chinese fishermen died after a pursuit by Taiwan's Coast Guard, setting off a series of maritime encounters between the two sides.
I think that Beijing doesn't want escalation. Part of it, I think, is concern over its own domestic economy, its own demographic issues that will, I suppose, get Beijing to be a little bit more cautious, but only up to a point. If things get worse, there is always the temptation of appealing to nationalism and looking strong. And one area where that could manifest is with regard to Taiwan.
Inside the Great Hall of the People in Beijing, the Chinese political elite's position on the Taiwan question is clear.
我觉得都是一家人嘛，祖国迟早是会统一的，应该会要加速吧。
In 2018, these political elites approved constitutional amendments that removed presidential term limits, allowing President Xi to remain in office indefinitely. President Xi will be 96 by 2049, while the People's Republic of China will turn 100. The unknown, though, is the PLA's position among the world's mightiest militaries.
all is not calm in the South China Sea. Recent and more aggressive run-ins such as this between China and the Philippines have seen accusations fly, from alleged intrusion to infringement of sovereignty. The contested waterway is strategically vital. More than a third of global shipping passes through each year. The area also boasts a wealth of natural resources. Beijing claims nearly all of the water body, despite an international tribunal ruling that there is no legal basis. This famous U-shaped line, the source of tension with the host of Southeast Asian nations. For more than 20 years, ASEAN and China have been trying to create a framework to negotiate a legally binding code of conduct. To date, little progress has been made beyond something largely symbolic.
I think ASEAN is increasingly sitting on edge regarding what's happening in the South China Sea. At this moment, the declaration of the Code of Conduct is all that ASEAN has with China.
Rizwan Rahmat, a principal defense analyst with Janes, adds that in the past 2 decades, the dispute has become more global. Australia recently pledged millions to boost maritime security with ASEAN. Navies from Germany and Canada are in the region, and American freedom of navigation operations are often condemned by China. Mr. Rizwan adds that the presence of these warships builds interoperability between navies in the region and elevates the war readiness of Southeast Asian countries.
So my concern with the South China Sea conflicts in the next few years is that with the presence of these many warships, the chances of a miscalculation happening between the naval services are very high. The fact that we don't have a code of conduct on how the parties should be behaving is one of the reasons why we are saying that the chances of a conflict escalating from small incidents will be higher in the next few years.
Away from choppy waters, ASEAN is seeking unity on another regional security threat, Myanmar's ongoing conflict. Analysts say last October's offensive launched by 3 ethnic insurgent groups is the most serious challenge to the military since the 2021 coup. In February, the Myanmar army enforced a dormant military enlistment law. Now that sparked fear among young men and women who started applying for visas to work overseas. One immediate concern is brain drain. The other is escalated violence. Civilian troops and some ethnic armed groups are seeing results from using drones to bomb military targets. Experts say the shifting nature of warfare in Myanmar and elsewhere, such as Ukraine, has changed calculations for military planners everywhere. And looking at the coming decades, deteriorating security conditions could reshape ASEAN cooperation beyond civil, economic, and political matters.
I think it is inevitable that ASEAN itself will have a security and military component to it. I think it will be just a matter of time before military exercises between ASEAN members are being conducted under the ambit of ASEAN. Therefore, ASEAN itself, as an institution, as a framework, will transform in the light of this escalating security situation in the region.
For the leaders of tomorrow, Southeast Asia boasts a great deal of promise, but also poses security challenges that will require deft diplomacy to ensure a broader peace and order are maintained.
Hefei, the capital of Anhui Province in East China, an important outpost in China's resistance against the US tech blockade. The state-run Hefei high-tech zone assembles and incubates companies focusing on hotly contested emerging areas, from artificial intelligence to quantum computing and semiconductors. Last year, government-backed investors pumped in $5.4 billion into Hefei-based semiconductor startup Changxin Xinqiao. It's one of the biggest investments from China's flagship semiconductor fund, also known as the Big Fund, in recent years.
We're more concerned about how we can survive through the process. I mean, it is happening, but we don't want to be killed during the process, right? Because the supply chain is going to change. Customer will withdraw from China. Maybe one day we cannot buy, this critical material. We don't have access to this tool, or the tool cannot be repaired.
U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan once used the phrase "a small yard and high fence" to describe the Biden administration's intent to restrict China's access to what he called choke points for foundational technologies.
That will force China to do by ourselves. Self-innovation will make them. And China is the largest semiconductor market of the world, accounting for about 1/3. Okay? So if China can do by itself, and the market is still growing, but in that end, the higher leading chip companies of the United States, and the Netherlands, and Japan, and the South Korea are excluded, but they will suffer. So this double-edged sword.
But the big state push for tech self-sufficiency proves to be a complex undertaking. In 2022, several executives connected to the big fund were investigated for corruption. Industry observers said for a project of that scale, bumps in the road are expected.
There are going to be some misallocation of funds, right? This is natural because you're trying to use the fund to foster a whole bunch of companies, small companies. Some companies might fail, and they will fail. But in the long term, I think the funding could still play a critical role.
The high-stakes game of global tech dominance has gotten countries' attention. TSMC, the world's largest contract chip maker, just opened its first plant in Japan and is planning for a second. Japan said it's ready to give TSMC more than $10 billion for doing that. China will face a steep climb as it works towards its ambition to become a global leader in science and innovation by 2050.
The rise of computers in the past century has fundamentally altered the world, creating entirely new systems of communications, commerce, and many other aspects of our daily lives. But the new frontier of quantum computing could prove to be a game changer with potentially seismic tech shifts in the coming decades.
This is the architecture we've designed to create modular systems.
And research into the quantum realm is taking place here inside IBM's quantum program headquarters just north of New York City.
Quantum System 2 was designed to tackle complex problems that lie far beyond.
We do a lot of the activities here, from building the underlying quantum processing units to building the systems like the one behind me, to building the software stack on top of it.
Classical computers process information in a binary way with ones and zeros. That limits how much data they can handle and the decisions they can produce. But quantum computing is multidimensional. It processes information in quantum bits, or qubits, which, very simply, delivers better quality results a lot faster. As that power is harnessed, it could help to solve difficult problems facing the world today and lead to breakthroughs in a wide variety of applications, from cybersecurity and logistics to drug research.
When it comes to creating new medicine for us, we have to have a better way of creating better treatments, better therapeutics. There are too many diseases such as Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, ALS, MS, that have no great solutions right now for the majority of people.
For now, quantum computers require this sort of advanced facility that's out of reach for you and I. But there are signs it's moving from the theoretical realm into the real world. Universities are at the forefront of the U.S.'s quantum strategy. Last year, researchers here at the University of California at Berkeley were able to use a quantum computer to solve a problem that a classical supercomputer couldn't. That was considered an important milestone for quantum computing and the U.S., which many experts believe is currently leading the field. The government has spent around $3 billion to fund quantum efforts as the race heats up between tech firms and between nation states. Experts also consider China a leader in the space. The government has poured around $15 billion into research, going big on quantum communications, as it has the potential to make Beijing's data networks difficult to hack. The EU also sees quantum science as critical to Europe's future security architecture. In 2018, it launched its billion-dollar long-term research and innovation initiative, Quantum Flagship. And its member states are building a quantum communications infrastructure set to be ready by 2027. IBM's Scott Crowder believes that the next 5 years will bring what he calls the first practical uses of quantum computing, followed by a transformational jump at the beginning of the next decade. After that, he says it's harder to predict.
These are, large systems, probably cloud deployed, or part of like HPC centers. But when you start talking about a 25-year time horizon, it could be more ubiquitous than that.
Countries and regions are in a race to be well positioned for the so-called Q-Day, when quantum computers will be able to crack codes that protect our digital data. It used to be seen as a date far into the future, but recently some experts said it could come as soon as 2025.